I just want to start because as I was thinking about today's panel, I came across a quote from Amberlynn Quain-Molina, an Aboriginal writer and author from the Pilbara region of Western Australia, and I quote, she says, "Two different worlds now exist in the same space, and there is no place of innocence for settlers to stand. Not one location where settlers do not benefit, do not inherit the benefits of the violent dispossession of those that were here before. You are living on stolen land, but the question now for you, what can you do about it?" Our collective refusal to speak the truth of the history of this country has allowed for the development of a fictitious national identity which ignores the brutal and ongoing impact of colonisation. This panel, titled First Nations Sovereignty, Truth, Voice, Treaty and Beyond. We're going to be joined, and if I could ask the panel to come on upstage, I'd like to introduce again Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, who really, in my view, does not need an introduction. The woman is extraordinary. She's a Wurundjeri and Ngari Ilum Wurrung woman, Deputy Chair and Commissioner of the Yurok Justice Commission. She was the National Sector Development Manager for SNAKE, which is the national voice for our children, as Deputy Chair of SNAKE between 2013 and 2016. Ms Hunter spoke on the Royal Commission into Institutional Sexual Abuse of Children in Care and sat on the working group for the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children. She's a trained social worker and has worked for Aboriginal children and family welfare fields for over 18 years. She had previously had oversight of all the cultural clinical healing services at the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency. She was also co-chair of the Family Matters campaign to end the overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in out-of-home care. And on and on and on we could go. My dear, wonderful friend, Sue-Ann Hunter, please give her a round of applause. Just introduce our two other speakers, and we have had some changes, sick children, ill health and so on, but Phil Saunders, welcome, hello. Phil is an Aboriginal man, descended from the Bumijit, is that right? Yes. Gunditjmara. See, this is the thing, when we're not taught language in this country, and it really irks me that I have the freedom to speak Greek Macedonian, I speak both languages, and yet we've yet to introduce First Nations languages into our schools. He's worked as a barrister and solicitor, consultant legal advisor over many, many decades, born into the movement of Aboriginal rights and raised by a single mother of 6 who was a passionate grassroots activist and campaigner. Phil's focus is on improving justice and wellbeing outcomes for Aboriginal people across Australia. Phil, you've chaired so many organisations, aged care sector, youth arts. You're an artist, a storyteller at heart. You're currently the co-host of Nunga Wanga Radio, Monday nights if you want to hear it, so get with it. Recently appointed as the interim CEO of the National Aboriginal Cultural Institute, Tandanya. Philip is father to 2 daughters and currently lives in Adelaide, South Australia. So you've come across here to be with us. Thank you so much. Lewis Brown, please, round of applause. Thank you. Lewis Brown is a proud Yorta Yorta, Jaja Wurrung and Gunditjmara man and holds the position of Reconciliation Advisor for STEM College. Lewis is responsible for supporting STEM College build a more culturally competent environment and continually to educate staff on First Nations business, protocol and way of being. Outside of RMIT, Lewis is a proud dad of 2 and is actively involved in the First Nations community, holds board of director roles on an Aboriginal controlled organisation and practices his culture and land management through Djarawarrung Aboriginal Clans Corporation. And Lewis, prior to working for RMIT University, you worked for the Koori Court, and I'm sure that's where we first met. At the Koori Court and Project Officer, Executive Officer for the Aboriginal Justice Caucus, a number of case management roles at the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, and the Family Violence Healing Support Worker at the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service. Wow, what a panel. Please join me in welcoming all 3. I'm going to hand it over to you to make some opening statements, Commissioner Hunter, and then we'll get into the panel discussion. Thank you.
No, thank you. I hate bios. Sometimes I feel like they talk you up a bit and you're just like, just get over it. Anyway, let me start again by acknowledging the lands were on my ancestral lands, the lands of the Wurundjeri. I need to honour my ancestors, my elders, those that came before me, so I'm able to stand here today with a voice and be able to speak my truths and their truths. If you know anything about the Wurundjeri, which you may not, because the story's not told, it's quite shameful, the Wurundjeri were whittled down to 13 people. We all descend from one woman, Annie Barratt. And I'm so proud that I descend from such a strong line of very, very strong women. I'm a single mum to a little girl who turns 12 tomorrow, actually, who is the reason I do what I do. And I'm sure this is why we stand up as Aboriginal people. I never thought I'd be standing here as a commissioner. I believe our elders guide us to the doors that we're supposed to walk through, and we have to be courageous enough in this world and strong enough to walk through those doors into spaces where we're not welcome, into spaces that don't want to hear our truths, and into the spaces that don't want us there. And that is the only way we can sort of move forward. I want to thank you for giving us, all of us, a platform today to have a voice up here and to be able to give truth to our own and perspective areas that we speak in. I want to talk about, firstly, the definition of sovereignty. Now, I'm going to use white and black, because that's what I do. The definition out of, I love Google, right? We all do it. And so it says, sovereignty in political theory, the ultimate overseer or authority in the decision-making process of the state and in the maintenance of order. Our sovereignty as Aboriginal people lies in our self-determination as Aboriginal people are making decisions for ourselves and our future, and has 3 components: land, law and people. What a stark contrast, really. I don't know if anybody's put those 2 together. They're completely different. We just want our own self-determination. We don't need or want to determine other people's lives. We all talk about we've never ceded sovereignty. It means you relinquish or yield something you are ceding, which is our land, and we've never given that back. So I'm very aware, and I always say to people, because I live and work you're on my land. My daughter now says it, and I used to be really not embarrassed, but not strong enough to say it. My dad always said, this is your land, and you have the power to make change, and you know, I hold strong in that. At Yuruk, our platform has been hard fought for. It's been over 200 years, and we finally have a Truth and Justice Commission, not a Truth and Reconciliation, a Truth and Justice Commission, where we can address and redress systemic injustices that are forced upon our people. I was raised, not that long ago by the way, during a time when the history of this continent that we're all taught in schools began with the arrival of Captain Cook. The history of what came before European arrival is nothing more than a footnote. And the history of what happened after a white triumph of will, of making good the promise of an inhospitable and uncivilised terrain that they could only civilise. Nowhere was the space to learn about the brutality of colonisation, its destruction for our communities. Nowhere was the space to celebrate our First Peoples' histories and culture, our enduring survival, our continued activism. First People were erased and our stories were unheard. Our sovereignty was denied, but it was never ceded. So for those who don't know, the word Yuruk is a Wamba word for truth. And for those of you who may not be aware, the Yuruk Justice Commission is a Royal Commission. It's a very bit ironic, right? We're in a Royal Commission. Established in the conventional way by letters patent in May 2021. The fact that we have the powers of Supreme Court judges, that we can compel people, that we can make people answerable, and we can see those documents that we so have a right to see, is not lost on me. So the systems that lock us away, that take our children, are the same systems that we will use against them and their laws to be able to bring justice for our people. I'm not allowed to go off script because I get really activism type and then I get in trouble with the other commissioners. So I'm trying to be good look at this one. Don't leave me on, Maria. Europe means, oh, we've gone there. So we have three objectives. First, to deliver truth through the creation of a lasting public record. A public record of systemic injustices. Second, to promote understanding by bringing all Victorians with us on a journey of deep listening and learning about the history of our state. This will be painful. This will be very painful for you. But stay in that moment because it's been painful for us all our lives. The third one is to advance justice through transformation, through recommending changes to laws, institutions and systems, much of which may take up through treaty processes. So we do work alongside the treaty process. I will say Victoria is leading other states in this work. And I'm very, very, very proud of that. I'm very proud and honoured that I get to hear the voices of my people directly. And I do not take what I do lightly at all. Yuruk is the first Royal Commission of its kind and we seek to embrace difference in all aspects of our work. Its first inquiry examined the issues of systemic injustice and its impact on our community through amplifying the voices and lived experience of our people. We make sure that every step of the process is culturally respectful and culturally safe. I think the best thing for me is I don't sit on this big chair up away from everybody. I'll sit there next to Arnie and hold her hand while she's telling her story. And then at the end, we have a hug. And in that hug, there's a bit of healing for both of us. And these are the stories you need to lean into, and these are the stories you need to hear. I've got a whole thing there, but I'm not going to ramble on too much because I think we've got a lot to say and I'm understanding that we are a bit behind. Not that that'll stop me, I'll say it over there. But there is one thing that I really want to say, and we're not fighting individuals. We are fighting against a system that fails again and again and again. If we get this right and we make changes, we don't make changes just for us, we make changes for all of us in this state. I'm going to throw this out there and say, please stop asking me what you can do. Ask yourself, what are you prepared to do? Because I'm going to ask you some questions. Why are we as sovereign peoples always forced to be in mourning, in rage and in fear? Why are we left to ask how many more? How many more racist vigilante killings? How many more missing and murdered Indigenous women and children? How many more children removed from their families? How many more deaths in custody? How many more failures of the so-called justice system for our people? How many more inquiries, inquests and unimplemented recommendations of change? How many more vigils, funerals, memorials? How much more police and institutional victim blaming, where every time, all the time, our children are murdered, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, we just heard. Or they somehow deserved to die, sentenced to death for their blackness. There's more than one perpetrator that hunted Cassius. There was also the perpetrator of systemic racist violence and impunity, a system that is guilty, a system without shame or conscience or remorse. Have you not taken enough? When will there ever be enough? When will our children be seen as having a right to live, a right to dream, a right to be free, and a right to lead? A system of institutional racism, impunity that enabled the killing of a 15-year-old boy is the system that hunted and killed Kumanjay Walker. It's the same system that locks up and kills Cassius's brothers and sisters in prison against young people like Banksy Hill Detention, Casuarina Supermax Prison, Parkville Prison, Malmesbury Prison, and this is all against our children. It's the same system that continues to kill our people in custody with impunity. 419 deaths since the release of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody in April 1991. Say their names so people forget them. Auntie Tanya Day, Veronica Nelson, Heather Calgarrett, Joshua Kerr, Clinton Austin. Some of our people have died in the last 5 years. Institutional racism and impunity is the knee on our necks. The politics of so-called law and order and media of genocidal racism is the engine that creates and marks as guilty legitimate targets for killing, caging, removal, enforced disappearance generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, young people, women and men. Truth-telling is but one tool in this fight, the weapon I shall use for the next couple of years. Now you may not like this fella, but in the words of Malcolm X, I am for truth, no matter who tells it, and I am for justice, no matter who it's for. Nungocha.
Oh, okay, you've all got one. Thank you so much. What a fantastic way to start this panel, and I'm sure everybody here wants to think about some of the points that you've put forward. But can I ask you, if that's all right, Sue-Ann? I know, it's a challenge, but what's that? Oh, okay, you'd rather I did. That might be better then, hey? Okay. Thank you. Can you hear that? Oh, well, you don't need to, really. I've got quite a voice. Is that better? Yeah. Sue-Ann, is that all right? Or Commissioner Hunter? Sue-Ann.
We're all friends here now.
We're all friends now, friends and family, as somebody said. 200 years plus of colonisation. Bloody hell. It's about time, isn't it? So, voice to Parliament, treaty, etc. I'm just wondering if you and any of the panellists here could actually tell me what does that mean in real terms for you, for some of the communities that you work with? Finally.
So I'm on the Truth Telling Commission. So what that means is people are able to tell their stories. We're hearing stories that are unheard, that people... An example is an auntie telling us about her first child removed when he was 3. And she had other children in the room, and she was quite elderly, and they'd never heard this story. And they didn't know they had this brother. And she was telling them this story. These are stories that we can't tell because you're just not believed, right? Like, who just takes the cue? And so the truth and all that evidence that we gain and have those recommendations will be evidence for treaty to be able to implement. So I think we've got some of it right. The voice, I'm not all over, and I just think that's another. And by the way, don't get caught up on does it need to be voice, treaty, truth. Like, that's irrelevant, because I keep getting asked that, and that's not the point. I think the point is, how do we get self-determination, right? Is this the way? I don't know, but we've got to try it, and we've got to do it. And I think the government, or governments in Victoria, whoever gets in, are prepared to ride this wave with us. But it's still a struggle. You're a Royal Commission, but it's still a struggle, and it's hard. And I just need to say that we're not the problem to be fixed, it's the system, right? And it's not individuals, it's the system that creates this. And so if we all want the same thing, we just want to do it different ways. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Lewis or Phil?
First of all, I just want to give thanks to Newkind for picking me to come onto the panel, and I just feel in awe of being surrounded by greatness right now. And that question really gets me reflecting that we're all in this moment in time, and I'm thinking about my great-grandmother, Nanny Edna Brown, who fought for a funeral fund just to be able to bury our people with dignity and not being unmarked graves, and to establish the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service to address the health complications that was brought with the structure of invasion. And just that word itself, that I don't really see invasion as an event, but more so, yeah, it is a structure, and it's something that is harming our people, and I feel a little bit emotional about it, but and I feel like my fight right now is that especially in my work, I'm looking at decolonising pedagogy and curriculum, and that has been such a challenge. And also with my work with the Judge Aboriginal people, going onto country and telling stories, and it being and seeing that our spirituality is so it is valued and people love to hear it, but as soon as we start talking about deaths in custody and the health complications that are coming with that, nobody really wants to hear that, and that's just been such a challenge. And I wanted to share this story just about another thing that I'm struggling with is that my son started at school, and I've moved south of the river, and it's interesting to see how the levels of social responsibility is very place-based here in Melbourne, and I could see the teacher sweating because he started in school. He came from a very proud community. He went to Yapra Children's Services, which is a First Nations children's service that's right near the Aborigines Advancement League there. So full of culture, and he went into the Captain Cook House. So I got straight onto the school council. And it's now named in butter on my roof, which is really great. That wasn't a fight I had alone. I was a fight with his mother as well, who was very staunch, a very staunch Waingaroos woman, so I'm very proud to be around that as well.
Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, brother. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet today. Madu Karu, Naranain and Phil. Yeah, big questions, and you know, I think it's great to be up here with you guys to share this space, and you know, a lot of things. I was just thinking on the way here, I was thinking a lot about this. I wonder what my mother would be thinking. You know, my mother was very much a lemon to drive toffee apples, toffees, and fundraising before it was all structured and formalised, and that's why, you know, what she was doing was, you know, activism, and that's certainly where I come from. And now we're talking about big questions confronting the nation, and I think also too the important thing is about truth telling. And Brother asked me last night about, you know, what does it look like beyond, and I think the first point of call really for me is to have an honest and sobering conversation about the history of this country. And what does that mean in practical terms? Well, it's a human story, you know, it's a human story, and it's about the carnage that was wreaked upon us as First Nations people, on our ancestors, and the impacts that flow from that. I think that's the real big story. That's the bedrock. You know what I mean? This country is 65,000 years old, and it didn't begin at European intervention, whatever you want to call it, invasion or whatever. You know? And that's the first point of call. But like I see, and I think Sue-Ann touched on it, is you know, the stories, the history of this country. You cannot talk about a voice to Parliament. You cannot talk about other things unless we really have a conversation of what it looks like, our history. We talk about that in relationships, within our own intimate partner relationships, or whatever, with our children, or whatever, within our workplaces, about what happened in the past and how can we address it and how can we live in the solution. So that's, for me, it's what it's about. Is, you know, there's so many stories, there's so many heart-wrenching stories, and it's not in the past. I mean, young fellow in WA, you know, young Cassie is walking home from school. It's a living and breathing wreckage that's still on it today. And so, but also to look at, I'm an optimistic person. I think the movement's in great shape. You know, today we're having this space here with a lot of other people talking and sharing their experiences. So, you know, I always look for the silver lining. I think I've got children, 2 daughters, and you know, they want to talk about other things, and I want to talk about the movement, and I want to talk to them about the history, and I want to talk to them about, you know, getting fired up and sort of kick the doors down, you know what I mean? But they want to be a 14-year-old girl who wants to go shopping on the parade. So it's finding the balance, you know what I mean? So that's what I think, yeah.
It feels to me, and I was having this conversation earlier on with some people outside, people of my age. We walked over Sydney Harbour Bridge. We did various things. You know, I feel like constantly though, mainstream media, mainstream discourse seems to derail, whether it's representing so-called splits in the Aboriginal movement. Look, there's no agreement there. Obviously, you've had a great deal of experience throughout your respective activism around those points of resistance in our community. As authentic allies in the room, what are the kinds of things that we really need to be aware of when those points of distraction start to really set in?
I think those points of distraction are always going to be there. So we had a commissioner leave, and so it was called infighting because we were black. But if a commissioner left on another commission, it was called administrative issues, right? So it's the wording. You know, if you watch as Cassius Turvey, as that starts to go forward, demonise the black body, right? Demonise the other side and take that out of context. And look, it's just fresh in my mind. Last night with the Ferguson Rising, they really pointed out how during that day he went into a convenience store and took some cigars, right? He was 18 and he pushed the guy. But we've got to remember, it doesn't matter what anyone does, it doesn't require you to kill somebody, right? It doesn't require death. And when you lock somebody up, oh, they were just in prison, they shouldn't have done that. But, you know, does it require someone to die? No, it doesn't. So it's the weighing up, but the media are so forceful and they're so great at demonising a side that fits their agenda and sells papers, because really they have to go with the narrative to sell their papers, to get people on board. I've still got to be careful, I'm a commissioner now, but it's true in, I'm the risky commissioner currently, I don't know. But it's that demonising of the other. It's the othering even more and more. And you're set up before you go. I don't know how many times, and I still get, so you're on a Royal Commission. You're on a commission, or is it an inquiry? No, it's actually a Royal Commission with Royal Commission. Oh, is it just because you're black? Like there's no recognition that I can think. Or at that, the other thing is, oh yeah, you're fair enough and you've probably been able to get under the... What's that got to do with anything? I'm a very proud Aboriginal woman, but that's in this day and age, and it's always people othering. And all I'm going to say to you is, there's this quote, and you're really good at quotes, Maria, so you may pick up. It's about speaking up when we're not in the room. If you speak up for me as an Aboriginal person when I'm not in the room, I don't even have to be there, but I will thank you. I don't even have to know about it, but know that you already have my thanks. And we should do that for everybody. because that's the way you start the conversations about whatever it is. You don't have to agree with what they're saying or have an argument about it. I always do would you say that if they were coming back in the room? And people just stop. You know, those jokes those racist underlying jokes, like let's just nip that. It takes a lot to stand up. And that's how we start the conversation, particularly when it's media and it's hyped up and it's big and it's in the lunchroom and someone's having a conversation. Oh yeah, but he stole this, but it doesn't deserve what people end up with. Sorry, I go on around there, but it's true.
Can I just say one thing too about, what was the question about division? Yeah, like, I don't necessarily agree.
The way it's represented.
Yeah, the way it's represented and things like that. And this is the conversation I had with a friend of mine, he's a mate, and he was asking me about the voice question, and you know, he comes from a very sort of, white bread background, you know what I mean? And I'm probably the most colourful person he's met within his friendship group. But he was asking these questions, and he said about Lydia Thorpe. I don't agree with everything what Lydia says. But I said to him, the problem that you're finding and you and friends find so, I guess, hard to digest is hearing a black woman speak so forthright. And you know, it's bad enough being a woman, right? And then it's bad enough, and then you add another layer of you know, her Aboriginality. I think that's the first question, is that, yeah, and division within the community and the way it's reported. It's not uncommon. We see that within the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, prime ministerships and things like that. We're not a homogenous group, but objectively at the end of it, what we're seeking is common ground around certain points. And I think what Sue Ann was touching on, other people, I say to people, this is a job not just for me or for 3% of the population. We need allies, we need to mobilise, we need people. It's a grassroots movement, right? And that's where it needs to come from. So we need you guys also to have skin in the game to make some inroads.
Did you want to say anything at all?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, sort of speak about the media a bit as well. And it's just this thing that any way of doing or way of being, I've always been often told, have you done the Herald Sun test? How is this going to be perceived by media? And are we going to be written about in a deficit way to make our people look bad? And it's almost like we have to we have to show our activism in a way that won't hurt our people, and that's a really hard thing to navigate. And we are such a diverse people, and we have so many people. Wherever you go, you're on Aboriginal land, but wherever you go, there will be a difference in law, protocol, the way that place has been impacted by invasion. So it's almost very different, very unique. I feel like when I go to Jarrah country, it's very different to Wiradjuri country. We've got our own battles and we've got our own things that we value in our own law. There's this place on Jarrah country, and it's very closely connected to Tanarong country. And I'm reflecting about dispute resolution and mediation, and what was that like before colonisation? Now dispute resolution is often in a courtroom with no windows looking outside on country. There's this place in Jarrah country, very close to Tanarong country, and before boats had come, it was a place of doing business, and there's this beautiful big tree, big scar tree, and it looks like a canoe had been taken out of it, and it had been recognised as this place of doing business. So Tanarong or Jarrah people would go out, light a fire, and smoke would rise in the air. And that was a way of saying, it's time to do business. So they would gather there, and it would be very outcome focused. It would be, rather than reflecting on more so what's our differences in opinions, there would be, let's come together and talk about a reciprocal relationship, and that's not happening so much anymore. It's really hard. I think that, and you know what's great about this area is that you can go out there, you can close your eyes, and you can listen to the water, our spirit. In Jar, we believe that water is spirit, or mura, which means spirit. We are 90% water, so that's how those correlate. You listen to birds and you listen to them telling songs of the country, and what a great way to talk about things to have really future-focused conversations. I think that as authentic allies, we could really think about how can we resource First Nations people to bring it back to them and bring it back to value and culture as top priority, and how do we value the matriarch in this position, and just returning to the way things was before colonisation.
So Lewis, I wonder if, again, to any of the panellists, but the valuing that you talk about, is that for those of us that perhaps aren't as familiar with the Makarrata process and the voice to Parliament, are they some of the underpinning sort of principles that we really need to ensure we're respecting and centring? Is that what we're talking about? Because there's a lot of dialogue out there about Makarrata, about voice, about treaty, but ultimately, if we had to kind of boil it down, what does it look like?
I've not been a whole lot involved in the Makarrata process, but my understanding is that there's something that happened in 2001, and that was the establishment of the agreement between the Victorian Aboriginal community and the Victorian government, and it's called the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And I'd really like for that to be viewed as a great example of what a somewhat effective justice agreement. Our people are still dying in custody. However, we now have the Koori courts, and we now have. Am I still here? There we go. We now have the Koori courts. We now have wellbeing officers in our prisons, and I think what's important in this Makarrata process is that we are definitely we need to value diverse opinions of different mobs across the state, or whoever needs to contribute to the process.
Just on that too, I just want to speak to the voice. It's really important. Like, firstly, I see it as being a question around. It's so simple, and people are asking us to say what you're saying, or you read conversations in the press, or you talk to people, so what does it all mean, and all that sort of stuff. I think, firstly, to understand that what we're doing is building a consensus. We're in a campaign. It's a campaign question. We're having conversations like here. Okay, so in some ways too, building the road while we're driving on it, okay? And that's not unusual, right? We see that in election cycles and things like that. So let's not get hooked up on sort of the end result, right? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? The simple question is, does the Constitution recognise Aboriginal people? No, it doesn't, okay? And so do you think it's a fair thing that there should be, that Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be recognised in the document that was written by, years ago by white fellas that didn't really consider anything that didn't look like that? That's the first question. The issues around the commission of that will come later in treaty. The first port of call, and I see this for me, is the issue of a voice to Parliament, okay, enshrined in the Constitution, cannot be, I guess, replaced like ATSIC was by the Howard government, Amanda Vanstone. So it can't be dismantled by future governments, okay? And I think that's a really important point to remember. And also too, policy settings that are made about our mobs, okay, should be considered by a panel, okay, to speak to those policy settings. Well, I think that's a very good idea, right? Because what we've seen many times, government making laws and regulations and things like that. We saw it in the intervention when the Racial Discrimination Act was suspended. We saw the Army going into Aboriginal communities in the Territory, unheard of, right? Since probably the Vietnam War, going into Aboriginal communities, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities up in the north, kids and all that sort of stuff, old people running to the hills because they were frightened and hiding in the desert, okay? So that's, I always say to people, let's not get hooked up on the minutiae, let's not get caught up in the reeds, okay? The simple question is, do you think A, B, C, D and E? And I think it's a good idea. The Constitution does not recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, full stop. Should it be changed? And I always say to people too, I think the National Disability Insurance Scheme is a great idea. I didn't go and read all the legislation behind it. Okay, I didn't go and sort of do all this research on it. But I tell you what, I think it's a good idea because my mate Corey down the road gets a service where his life's improved because he gets a package. And it's just about fairness and it's about, you know, let's let's be realistic. And I think that's what it's about. And we're building a campaign, getting out there, hitting the universities, mobilising the people and having these conversations with allies and other people out there who don't know anything about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but actually believe in fairness, believe in what is right.
I agree with you there. I think people are getting caught up in what is the end, and we don't know what the end is because we've never done this before. And every time you do something new, there may be stumbles and there may be ways, but it's about keep moving forward. And so let's not get caught up in what's down the road, because we can't do that in the Commission. And I keep saying to everybody, we haven't done this before. This is the First Truth Commission, and we know everybody's watching, but if we stuff up, it's okay. Let's put our hand up and say, don't do that. So we're actually meeting in a couple of weeks with Uncle Mick Gooder, because they're doing it in Queensland, and they want to know how we've done it. And I'm prepared to say, this is what we did wrong. Don't do this. Maybe do that, because this is how we learn, this is how we improve, and this is how we'll... But the end game is a long way off, right? A long way. I always go, will I see it in my lifetime? A treaty, for instance? Probably not. Probably not. And my dad used to say, he's passed away now, they'll never say sorry. He didn't get to see that. My nan didn't get to see that, you know. But whilst this is what we do, we fight for the next generation. I fight for my daughter, and you all fight for your kids. We're born into this. We don't have a choice, really. And it's either, you know, you sort of get pushed out there to do it. And I would not do this for our next generation, because, you know, they deserve it.
That's a really important point too. Like, I see it as being a gift for my children, this conversation. The concept of a treaty and all that, I agree with what you've just said, and so that the voice is a stepping stone to the next step of a treaty, which will be down the track. So for me, it's a gift to my children, to our children, to our country, as a way of moving forward. And I just want to say one other thing about don't get bogged down in the minutiae. It's a trap. They're going to try. The right-wing media will try and create this all sorts of stuff to distract from what is the real, where is the skin in the game, you know what I mean?
Because my thing is, you've got nothing to lose in this, right? But you know what, you've got everything to gain. You gain the gift of our culture. What a gift, right? You gain more understanding of who we are. We are more united, and we will more fight together to get what we need, you know. When we fight as Aboriginal people to change laws and to change policies and to change systems, they don't just say, oh, we'll tick a box, we'll just change this for the Aboriginal people. We change it for all of us, you know? So don't be a bystander. I always say that, don't be a bystander thinking this is happening to somebody else. This is happening to all of us, and we all need to support each other through this process.
Certainly, we've met a few times, obviously, over the years, but the concept of truth-telling is something that I've really tried to immerse myself in. It's not a simple concept. It's actually quite a deep complex one for, again, those of us who are racialised settlers or non-First Nations. You talked in your opening statement about truth-telling and the pain associated, but the absolute necessity if genuine healing is going to happen. Can you tell us a little bit more about what truth-telling is from the perspective of the Commission?
Yeah, so we're mandated to start at, they gave us 3 years for this, by the way. We've asked for a 2-year extension, but they've gone into caretaker, just happened to go into caretaker mode, left it for a bit longer. So it starts from 1788 right through to current. And so for me, I look at it as how do we get that understanding of what happened in the past and connect those dots to why it's still happening. And colonisation wasn't an event. Colonisation is still happening now. It just looks different, right? Kids still being taken, the whole jail system, the whole poverty. Like, I don't know how you solve poverty, but that's the underlying issue here. And we're tasked with systemic injustice. And so that truth-telling, we're not on a public record, so there's a history of Victoria, right? We don't have a say in that, we get a say now. And so we're going to create a public record from our voices. Now, we get challenged, the truth is, you can take it anyway. But there's also, you've got to remember, right, the British were great at writing down, I was going to say shit then, but stuff, right? I've got to remember where I am, I haven't sworn, I'm being really good. And so they were great at documenting everything, right? And it's through a very white lens. But Varney comes along about a massacre and she tells us, there was this massacre and this is what happened and my nan told my nan and we can go and research that because they wrote everything down. It's just through a different lens, right? And they just incriminated themselves so much. And so bringing the past into the future and getting people, part of our job is to join those dots, and I like to keep it simple. The problem is there's so many legalities within a Royal Commission, and so I'm not a lawyer and I'm stuck with all these lawyers, sorry Phil, but I'm stuck with all these lawyers around me and I'll push the boundaries and I just say, well, can't we look at this differently? And why can't we do that? Because the law's an interpretation of how we interpret it, right? So let's interpret it this way. And we've got Tony McAvoy, if anybody's heard of it, and just, we have these brilliant, I'm fangirled when we got him and I'm like, oh my God, I'm his boss, and I remind him too. But to have these conversations with these like-minded people about how we can get justice. Like, I wake up every day just feeling so blessed that I have this job to make a difference and to really get that truth. But you know where it happens? It's the little quiet moments with Arnie having a cup of tea and she drops a bombshell. And I'm a therapist by trade, so I am in my all element of nurturing Arnie, uncle, whoever it may be. I've held many a hand, we've gone outside and said, let's do a smoking, and in that smoking we've burnt tissues, because they're sacred tears, right? These tears have been held for generations. It's about smoking ceremonies, it's about how do you want to tell your truth in your way. We can go and sit under a tree, we don't need to sit in a formal room. But what's going to keep you culturally safe in those moments? And what do you need to? Do you need to bring something? Who do you need to? There's no formalities. We're going by the way people need to, because that's how we're going to hear the little voices that are down the back that are like, no, I'm okay. It's different. So you can actually tell your truth by art, song, dance, like poetry, whichever way you want. It can be submitted, and it can be done in your truth of your history, or it can be done on a certain topic. And the other thing, it's a world first, Indigenous data sovereignty. So if we remember the Birmingham Home Report, those stories are just out there, they're fodder for people. People get to share the parts they want to share, or they don't get to share it at all. So we've actually put a recommendation in to change the privacy law, so we're able to not, could you imagine, this has happened, going somewhere and someone's telling your auntie's story about stolen generation? And so that's happened often. So we're doing sort of that work as well. It's not easy, it's really hard, and there's lots of tears, lots. on my part as well, like, you know, but it's also, I feel good that I could hold someone's space for somebody in that moment. So, yeah.
Thank you. Decolonisation might well be the way to move past the saviorism, I suppose the way in which sometimes we watered down the movement. Some might suggest reconciliation was a bit of a watered down of what really this country needed. I'm interested from your perspective, Lewis, is decolonisation a way of kind of challenging what Jackie Huggins once said to me is enough with the performative allyship? Like, it's got to be more than a performance, folks. It has to be a genuine attempt to be an authentic ally. Is decolonisation the methodology you think that we here in this room need to become more familiar with?
I think so. And the interesting thing about the word reconciliation, it's in my title. And that's a challenge that, no, it's fine. Because the funny thing about reconciliation is that, you know, it almost insinuates we had some kind of relationship before.
Yeah.
And it's just so absurd to me that that reconciling is the responsible of First Nations people. And it's just more so, the way I see it is that reconciliation is the responsible of settler Australians.
Can I just add to that? How do you reconcile something that was built on mistrust, and it was built within the first 15 minutes on Gadigal country, the first shot was fired?
And exactly that. And it's more so we are constantly fighting and being victims of oppression, which has been really challenging. Is that better? I'm moving it around too much. I need to keep my hands still. Yeah, look, another thing that I see in work is that there's a lot of social responsibility. There's a lot of intent there, however, it very much exists between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, and that's very challenging because we really need to. What we as First Nations people need to see is really authentic responsibility. So, what are you doing outside of those hours? Are you, and how are you spreading awareness? And how are we dismantling systems that do oppress us as a people? And I sort of want to. Another part of this. We talk about the pace of, you know, racial justice and the wins we have, and especially in the last few years, I feel like there's been a reminder of that we can't be complacent and we need to remain vigilant. In that we've seen it during COVID when they locked down those high-rise towers, and that had so many people of colour that basically had their human rights taken away from them. And when the Queen passed, and it was really hard to, during that week, it was really hard to drive around and see schools and different places flying our flag at half-mast, and Daniel Andrews trying to change the name to Queen Elizabeth Hospital from Morinda Hospital. And so yeah, decolonisation is really important in those moments, because it does feel like we are making progress. However, when push comes to shove, we are just reminded that we exist under the colony, and that's heartbreaking.
I think that's what you touched on before. That we can get the rug pulled out from under us at any point. So things need to be meaningful, and we need... Look, self-determination is a word that gets bandied around a lot, but the true meaning is we need to be in charge of our own affairs. Now, I don't know if we're ever going to see that, but you know, you pointed that out, that in certain ways, the money can be taken off us, which the power or the positions we sit in can be taken off us at any time by government. And let me tell you, we're reminded of that constantly.
I think about my mum when I'm having these conversations. I just hark back to that. It's really hard to separate the two in the sense that when you, like I was asked, everyone was asked last night, Brother Boy was saying about, you know, what do you hope for at the end of it? Like, you know, not the end, but what do you hope for into the future? And I think it's really hard when you were born into it, then you live it every day and you're engaged in this sort of armed combat of, engaging in sort of dialogue, these types of conversations. You don't stop really, and you've got to get into self-care. So I think about sometimes, I grew up in Barron in Mount Gambier. My mum worked in factories and she was picking strawberries or corn or whatever. And I think about, I don't reckon my mum ever thought about colonisation. I don't think she talked about reconciliation or anything like that. I think she just did it. And sometimes that's how I think. I try not to get hooked up on it, but it's a recognition that I'm operating within a system that was forced upon me. Okay, and so what I do is try and do what I can and speak in a way that to bring my brothers and sisters from, you know, my white brothers and sisters along with me, because I need them when we go to a referendum to vote and tick the box yes, because I'm one of 3% of the population. And I don't say to them, I want them to have, you know, I'll describe it like this, there's the chicken and the pig. They're having a conversation about breakfast. And they're saying, yeah, let's have eggs and bacon for breakfast, right? And the pig says to the chook or the chicken and says, your input into the breakfast is going to be a contribution. My input into the breakfast is going to be a sacrifice. And I think that's what it's about. So I want them to be part of this story and to say, come along with me. Okay, but you don't have to understand the ins and outs of it, but you know, I'm making a sacrifice here. We've made a sacrifice to get to this point, you know, and just keep coming with us. So that's, whether it's colonisation or deconstructing or whatever it is, I don't know. I'm just saying, let's just get on and do the business. Maybe I'm just a simple black fella from Mount Gambier, and that's how it is sometimes. Who happened to go to university by flukes.
Don't know that it was a fluke.
It was only Becca from LA Law. I thought I want to be like him. It wasn't because people say, did you do it because of this? I said, no, I was in a housing trust house in Mount Gambier. I said, I want to be like him, you know what I mean?
How did that work out for you?
He's blonde and blue, I'm short, nugget and brown.
Oh, that's too funny. Phil, though, I do want to end, because I know that we're coming to end of time, but not the end of the conversation, and beyond today, obviously, and tomorrow. But that vision, I think, is what drives us, the collective vision that, well, I'd like to see it in our lifetime. I don't see why it should be in our lifetime. We've seen other social movements where there's that political and community will. It happens. So the shared vision of what is possible. What would it take, though? What would it take if we could collectively work together responsibly, authentically? What would it take for all of us to make it happen?
Sorry, go.
Yeah, please.
This morning I get a text message from my 14-year-old daughter, and she says, Dad, don't forget to make the down payment of $1,000 to the school camp that's going on to the Cape York, okay? I always say the movement's in great shape. There's no doubt about it. There's all these exciting things going on in all these schools. She's part of, there's a whole heap of kids from all over the country, different mobs at her college, and there's some great things going, and they're having conversations that I never had growing up as a kid. And so I always say the movement's in great shape. And then we've got all these other things going on, these conversations, all these non-Indigenous brothers and sisters having these conversations, rightly or wrongly, you know what I mean? And we're up here talking about this sort of stuff. This never happened when I was growing up back home, and it never happened while I was at university or anything like that. So I think the movement's in great shape, And I think the momentum is going to be, we need to build the momentum to continue on. At the end of the day, the bedrock of our history was built on massacre sites and dispossession. I know all of that. There's so many things that have been read about it. I want to hear our brothers and sisters, the whitefellas out there, to understand some of the stories and the impacts of what happened. And it just didn't end, and it's still going on. But guess what? We're going to get through it all together if we all get knuckled down and build a country on the bedrock of our people, our ancestors, and all these other people that have come here, all the mob out there that have come along as well. And I think it's an exciting time. So, I don't know, does that answer your question? So the point is, my daughter's going to the Cape Yorkton School camp up there, and I think that's a great thing. We went to Rankbully or some other sort of, Ballarat or some other bloody town. So I just...
Don't give Ballarat a hard time.
I'm just saying,
I'm a Geelong girl, all right?
But anyway, that's what I think. It's in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Vision?
I definitely agree that it's in great shape. And when it comes to being future focused and visions, and I'm sure you both will agree with me, is that we wake up, we go to bed, constantly thinking about what the future will look like. And there's some common things that that I often think about is that how we read to the future is First Nations. So anything attached to the Union Jack should go. The royalty in England is not our royalty. This is our royalty. And that's a world that I want for my two sons, Kyra and Naroka. It's River and Kawa, named in Wairuru language. And what else do I think about is, I really think we need to abolish prison. And I spent hundreds, close to 1,000 hours in a courtroom advocating for our mob to not be incarcerated and constantly advocate to explore therapeutic healing over incarceration. And I've seen it happen way too often that a mob go into prison and then they come out and a whole lot of healing needs to happen. And every time they go back in, it's like a revolving door. A whole lot more healing needs to happen. It's harmful and it's isolating, and rather than that isolation and locking them up, we need to explore culture and healing, because essentially they could physically die in prison, but when they do go to prison, it does really feel like that spirituality and culture dies once they start getting locked up. So I really think abolish prison and let's explore returning to country and healing that way, because a part of the Union Jack and a part of the colony is the inability to look at things from a trauma lens focus, and that's something we really struggle with.
I have hope, because I have to, and we have to have hope, but at one level, we're having conversations, we're making change. At the other level, our people are still dying, our people are being removed, kids aren't, able to go to school. There's just a whole bunch of stuff when you're down here in it. And I choose to be down there in it because that's my people, and we all do that. It's not our job, but we do it because it's our mob. And I'm hoping up here can drift down to there, and we can, our kids. It's our kids that can walk into rooms and be treated like royalty. I said, my daughter, this is your country, and I don't want her ever again to come and say, Mum, why do they kill our kids? Why are our people dying? Try having that discussion with an 11-year-old about 2 weeks ago. I don't want her to have that discussion with her children. So that's my hope that I hold.
I think you'd all agree it's a pretty amazing panel. And as I said, and I think Edfan, you mentioned this is just one of many, many conversations we're going to be having throughout the next 2 days and beyond. I really like this quote from the late Uncle Archie Roach, if I could just end on this note. It does wonders for a person to just be still and listen to someone else talk about their life and how they probably came through things. Because you know what? You never know what you'll learn. You have shared so much, and it's just been an absolute privilege and honour to be able to share the stage with you. But please join me in thanking these three wonderful panellists.